Hello, genealogists. It's Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. You can tell it's going to be one of those days because I put my glasses on first instead of hunting for them in the middle of my discussion about what I was going to discuss. So part of the reason why I've got my glasses on is we're going to deal with a very detailed subject today in preparation for our conversation on citation in the Genealogical Proof Standards series. What I'm going to be dealing with today is the book Evidence Explained. If you don't own Evidence Explained, you should. If you can't afford Evidence Explained, then you should own Evidence, which is a version from 20 years ago at least. However, it's different in some ways in that the internet really wasn't a thing that many years ago. So in Evidence Explained, and in Evidence for that matter, there are two chapters. The first two chapters. And these are by far the most important two chapters in all of genealogy as far as I'm concerned. If you can understand the first and second chapters of Evidence Explained, then you will turn out to be a fine genealogist. I promise you. Because the first chapter deals with evidence analysis, and the second chapter deals with citation. And what we're dealing with in evidence analysis are the fundamentals of evidence analysis. In other words, we're going to build a foundation in order to move forward. And the same thing goes with citation. Now, because of the way that the genealogical proof standard is structured, you deal with citation before you deal with analysis. And that makes sense, because you want to cite that source long before you actually do the analysis. In other words, you already want to have the components of the source citation, not the source citation necessarily, but the components of the source citation already put to bed before you do the analysis, because it should be part of that record to begin with. Otherwise, they will get separated and you will have a problem. I did genealogy very incorrectly, very wrong for a long period of time, 15, 20, 30 years, from the time I was 16 until 1985, however long that was, probably 15 years. And the reason I did it wrong was because I was not properly citing my sources. And if I would have done that, I would have known that I looked at certain things 5 and 6 times, photocopied them 5 and 6 times. My memory then was probably not as good as it is now, I guess, but that's just the story of life. However, because of the way that the genealogical proof standard is structured, you want to deal with the issue of fundamentals of citation first, then as part of the second element, and then as part of the third element, we will deal with fundamentals of evidence analysis, and we'll do that separately also. So what I'm trying to do is to create a foundation of fundamentals of citation that will allow us, once we actually deal specifically with the genealogical proof standard, to be very comfortable and very happy and to be able to move forward. If we were not to do that, there would be too much quandary, I'll call it, umbrage, because you didn't understand it when we got to the genealogical proof standard. And the genealogical proof standard is not the place to learn about citation. The place to learn about citation is in Evidence Explained. So we're going to wander through the second chapter of Evidence Explained, which begins on page 41. But before I do that, I love Elizabeth Shown Mill's foreword. And this book was written and edited by Elizabeth Shown Mills. And I was actually very fortunate. If you look in the acknowledgments, you will see my name. But the foreword starts with the words, "All sources lie." And that's attributed to Lawrence of Arabia. Now, whether he actually said that or not, nobody has a clue. But he's reported to have said that. And this is the way I live. Because in my mind, all sources lie when they live in isolation. It's only when they are combined and collated and correlated and things are done to them with other records that we see their truth. That doesn't mean even in the truth side that they aren't lying, but all records lie. And she goes on to say that sources err, sources quibble, sources exaggerate, sources misremember, sources are biased, sources have egos and ideologies, and sources jostle for a toehold in the marketplace of ideas. And that, in my mind, is just so cool. And the point she's trying to make is that we invest a lot of time in these sources, but why? And her point is that all sources are not equal. And as we wander down this path together, you will see how all sources are not equal. So the basic issue of fundamentals of citation is, and I should preface what I'm about to say in that I'm not dealing with anything that relates to the Board for Certification of Genealogists today, per se. I don't represent the Board for Certification of Genealogists, and you'll get tired of me saying this ad nauseum. This is just Craig's opinion about what's going on and his interpretation of what Elizabeth Shown Mills is saying in her book, Evidence Explained. And remember, don't lose sight of the fact that you can't be a genealogist unless you have access to this book. I don't mean you got to own it, but if you don't own it, you don't have sufficient access to it. So one of the problems that was encountered when evidence came out, when Evidence Explained came out, was people took it to be the Bible. It's not. It's a guideline. It is designed to help you to create your own citations. It's not designed for you to use the quick sheets, use the, whatever she calls them, the gray pages, and copy things ad nauseum from it and trying to jam your record into this citation format. That isn't how it works. You want to understand the fundamentals of citation so that you can create your own citations. Now, how many people can create citations on the fly? Not very many. I'm not one of them. I struggle with citations all the time. I never can remember what to do what. That's why I pull out this book all the time. Even when it comes to military citations, I pull out this book all the time. When it comes time to publish something, I write my draft, I fake my citations, and then and my fake citations are basically the components of what a citation needs to be. But don't forget, where a citation is located in your document may determine its format. And you don't know when you create the citation what format you're going to use in the final product. So it's important to know what all the elements of citation are so that you can combine them in the appropriate way regardless. You may be dealing with NGSQ and their style sheet. You may be dealing with a register and their style sheet. You may be dealing with the genealogist and their style sheet. There are dozens of style sheets out there, and they are all different. But if you understand the fundamentals of citation, then you will be able to create whatever they want you to create for their publication when the time comes. So always recognize that citation is an art, not a science, and that there are various things out there that deal with the concept of citation. I don't know that you can see it because it's not there, it's in my other office, but the Chicago Manual of Style is the basis for what we're talking about, but recognize that the profession of genealogy has unique things that the Chicago Manual of Style was not designed to deal with. That's why Evidence Explained exists, is because the Chicago Manual of Style is a good foundation for doing citation, but it is not sufficient to build the house. So there are various style sheets, and some of you may be familiar with the MLA handbook style, the Modern Language Association, and that is used by libraries and the literature fields. But recognize that we are our own profession. We have our own methodology for doing things. And being able to do things in accordance with the guidance that exists in our profession helps to define you as a professional. Also recognize that you could be the best citation person in the world, and that doesn't mean anything if you can't do good analysis. And also recognize that citing the source is not an end in itself. It's just part of the process. It's what you have to do to record the specific location of a piece of data and to record the details that affect the evaluation and use of that data. And that's what a lot of people miss, is recording the details that affect the evaluation of that data, which will occur later on in the genealogical proof standard process. So we have various types of citations. There is a source list, and basically that's a bibliography. Then there are reference notes, there are source labels, and that is, what history does to track things. Now, recognize that a source list is used interchangeably with a bibliography, but reference notes and source labels. If you were doing something, if you're doing a historical piece, this is what you would deal with. There are other things that you have to deal with. You have to deal with the common knowledge rule. Everybody knows there was a civil war. You don't have to cite the fact that there was a civil war in the United States and it was from 1861 to 1865. You will have to deal with the concept of overlong citations. Some of my citations in the past, because they were layered, have been huge, but generally a citation should not be too big. And the other piece on citations is if they involve living people, that we have to respect their privacy. So there are 5 basic terms that are used throughout Evidence Explained that allow you to make some sort of quick recognition of where we are in the process. And they are the first reference note. And this term refers to the first time you cite a source in a particular database, manuscript, or published work. And it covers both footnotes and endnotes. The first reference. In other words, it's just like when you're writing something and you want to use an abbreviation in the future, you want to make sure that that abbreviation is used with the full text first, and then you can use that abbreviation throughout. So you could say Department of Defense, DOD, and then you could say DOD from then on. You could say Power of Attorney, POA, and then you could say POA from then on. Then you have the concept after the first reference note of the subsequent note, and that is basically a shortened version of that first reference note. Then we have a source list, and this term refers to the master list of all sources you are using for a particular research project. So it's not necessarily associated with the footnote. It is, because they're both on the footnote and in the source list, but the source list is a separate being. And then there's a master source list, which is used in many database management programs to refer to individual items in your source list. And typically a master source is a simplified citation. I don't use those very often for some strange reason. And once you've got something in a source list, you're going to have a source list entry. So there is a list of common practices in this chapter, which I don't really care about. I care about it from the perspective of I need to know it when I'm using derivatives or image sources, or I'm using indexes or finding aids, or I'm using National Archives materials, or whatever I'm dealing with. But it's really not important to the concept of, and I shouldn't say it's not important, but for me, it's understanding those pieces is not germane to creating the citation necessarily, because it's not universal. it's specific. So when you have a specific citation, you're going to want to look. And then we need to move through that. And what you'll find that all the things that they talk about in the fundamental of citations side of the house in this chapter that I'm dealing with are addressed later on in the work in a specific section. So there are, and we're not only talking about published things, we're also talking, in book form, we're also talking about online things and those kind of things. So, as you go through, you'll also find that in fundamental citations there are the concept of postal codes. Now, the Chicago Manual of Style, the last time I looked, now it may have changed, I don't have the newest volume, wanted you to use postal codes in your guidance. I don't do that. I use the old style states because I don't like capitals just hanging out in the middle of my work. I don't want to draw attention to the state. The state's not necessarily important. The material on the page is what's important. And you want to make sure that you use abbreviations sparingly in your text and in your citation. There is a list of abbreviations in the fundamentals of citation, and I would refer you to it, but you're going to look, my recommendation is you don't use abbreviations. And if you use acronyms, that you at least spell them out the first time, and then you can use them after that, I guess, but just in the interest of condensing your work down. So there also is the issues of capitalization, whether you use small caps, whether you use untitled. There's the issue of commas, dashes, and hyphens. Know the difference between an N dash and an M dash and how they're used. There is the issue of dates, and I am a person who uses military dates consistently. In other words, I use international usage. I do not use American usage. And that means that American usage would be April, spelled out, 1746, and that's the date of the Battle of Culloden. International usage would be 16 April 1746, the Battle of Culloden. I always want to put my dates first, my months second, and my year third. And that is because I spent 20 years in the military. I don't know any better. And because I was in the military, I reduced the month down to a 3-character month. And that is called the American Military Convention. And what it also does is put a 0 in front of the number. And I always do that because I like to know that that 1, 2, or 3 isn't there, that in fact it's a 0. There also is the issue of all kinds of things. And I recommend that in order to understand all these things, you actually sit down and read this chapter before, probably 4 or 5 days from now, we sit down and talk about the genealogical proof standard. If you have any questions about practice, if you have any questions about what was I talking about, then I recommend that you put something in the comments. The fundamentals of citation is interesting. You want to know what the pieces are. And the pieces vary by what it is. So what you will find as you peruse the book further, and I recommend that you do that, that you will have quick check models. Now, some people are of the opinion that all we really need is a book of quick check models that we can copy. And that honestly is not the case, because it won't work. Because these are so different from each other. And the guidelines and examples will allow you to get further insight into what we're actually talking about in regards to citation. So this has been Craig, and this has been Just Genealogy, requesting that you read Chapter 2 of Evidence Explained, or Evidence, whichever of the two books you have, Fundamentals of Citation, before we move on to the Genealogical Proof Standard and discuss citation. See you tomorrow.